before the recording, Alison, yoga being so ancient and old, and all of us at some point have gotten some benefits from it already. Yoga therapy relative to yoga history is relatively new. Can you tell us more about yoga therapy?
Yes. The thing that's funny about that is that yoga in its essence is therapy. It is therapeutic. So it's kind of
You're
fun
right.
to be like, oh, yoga therapy, when yoga is therapeutic and always has been. For me as a yoga therapist, there's a lot of times people ask me, so what is a yoga therapist? And it can be a complicated answer. And it's going to vary from yoga therapist to yoga therapist because we all have different training backgrounds. My background is really diverse. My path of learning and discovery has led me to some really interesting places and modalities. So my answer to this question is going to be unique to me. I did my yoga therapy training with Integrative Yoga Therapy, which is a phenomenal organization. The lead for that is a gentleman named Joseph LePage, and his wife Lillian LePage co-teaches with him. So if you're interested, I would check out Integrative Yoga Therapy. There are so many other programs out there. And the reason that I chose Integrative Yoga Therapy is because the idea is that we're not looking at symptoms necessarily. We will look at the symptom, but we're going to view the whole person. And the goal of the form of yoga therapy in which I am trained is to get a person into a state of healing where they're in contact with their truest self. So that, because that's ultimately what heals us, that light that is within ourselves. So some of the other forms of yoga therapy that exist really just focused on the physical structure. And like, oh, your shoulder hurts, do these yoga poses, here's your prescription, and your shoulder will feel better. Right. That's interesting, but that wasn't what really interested me about becoming a yoga therapist. It was, it's in the name, integrative yoga therapy. It was this idea that I am a multifaceted being. So I have a physical body, I have an emotional body, I have a nervous system or an energy body, as well as this aspect of myself that is a bliss body. So I've got these layers of myself. Oh, and I also have a body that is formed based on my belief systems, my limiting belief systems, or another way of saying that is conditioning and past events, early events. And I saw that within myself, that oftentimes it was an issue with one of those other layers of my being that then manifested on the physical level. So for me, I really needed a system that looked at all of those facets of the individual. And of course, I became a yoga therapist because it was my own path to healing. So I'm a person that has dealt with extreme physical injury, chronic pain, a really in-depth trauma history in my childhood and teen years. And I knew that all of that was a reason why my body felt the way it did and why my life looked the way that it did and why I had things like anxiety attacks and a whole other myriad of issues that were really related to what was going on with my nervous system, in fact. And for me, the idea of the energy body that we talk about a lot in yoga is synonymous with the nervous system. So we have, because yoga is such an ancient tradition, we have mystical language to describe things. But what's fascinating is myself as a scientist, the more that I study the nervous system, the more I have a modern scientific language to explain things to everybody else in the world that doesn't believe in yogic, mystical, magical wording.
Yes, isn't that the truth, right?
Yeah.
People have been trained to see and then believe. Right. But then at some point you have to kind of believe first, just go, if they need the background, if they need the research, yes, the research is there that yoga does healing and magic. But then sometimes you just have to go with your gut, and when you do something, like you said, you were recovering from a lot of anxiety yourself, possibly trauma, and then you found this and it works for you and you stick with it, right?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so the language that I will use oftentimes is that language of science, the language of the nervous system. So
Mhm.
for me as a yoga therapist, my job when I connect with a person, people come to me for a myriad of reasons. Some people come to me because they're having physical pain. Some people come to me because they're struggling with PTSD or depression or anxiety or recovering from cancer treatments. There's a lot of reasons that people reach out to me, but the number one reason is because they're suffering. And so when I connect with a person, I look at them on all of those different levels. What's going on
Gotcha.
with them structurally? What's going on with their emotions? What's going on with their nervous system? What's going on with these parts of themselves? What are their limiting belief systems? And we use all the tools of yoga, which
Mhm.
include physical practices, of course, but they also include learning how to regulate the nervous system through pranayama, through meditation, perhaps through mantra, through mudra, through so many different tools to essentially what ends up happening for the person is their nervous system regulates. And then
Mhm.
once that happens, their body starts to heal, their psyche starts to heal, their symptoms start to reduce, and the person that's guiding that is the conversation that they're having with their true self, their intuitive sense, which you just said, Faranak, listening to your own gut. And
Mhm.
sometimes we get so dysregulated and we have so much going on that we lose that connection with our own gut, or our connection with, in yoga, we call it the self with the capital S.
Yes.
Use that connection with self. And what I try to do, well, actually, I don't even try to do anything. I just go, here, let's explore these tools. Let's explore these tools. And the tools do it. What ends up happening is somebody gets into communion again with that part of themselves that is their truest self.
Yes.
Um, so that's what I do as a yoga therapist. I also have studied beyond my yoga therapy training with integrative yoga therapy. I went on to study a very structural form of, it's it's outside of yoga. It's called yoga line, the word yoga and align blended together.
Okay.
And it's the work of Michelle Edwards, who she has a book that got published that I was honored to write the foreword for. As I trained with her and worked with her, we became very good friends. And this modality looks at the way that our bodies structurally are actually designed, which
Mhm.
is through the fascia system. So it looks at the chains of kinetic energy that runs through the body and looks at balancing those chains so that our internal tensile forces aren't pulling our bodies out of alignment. And it does this through modified yoga poses as well as some of the principles of some other modalities that I studied, which
Oh.
is somatics. And somatics is the brainchild of Thomas Hanna, who was a student of Feldenkrais. If you've ever heard of the Feldenkrais method,
I have, yes.
yeah, somatics came from the Feldenkrais method. And what this method does is it works with the way that our nervous system actually controls the muscular tension that's held in the body. And oftentimes, when we have either a physical trauma or a psycho-emotional trauma, there's a chronic tension that's held in the body. And what this sequence of gentle movements does is essentially sensory motor reprogramming. So we
Mhm.
tend to, when we get locked in chronic tension, our sensory motor cortex kind of forgets about that part of the body. It's like the lights went on there and then they just stay on, and the brain's like, whatever, the lights are on over there. And Thomas Hanna referred to that as sensory motor amnesia. And what the movements of Hanna somatics do is they reprogram that sensory motor amnesia. So essentially, the cerebral cortex goes, oh yeah, I remember this part of the body. And we use what's called pandiculation to create release, which is actually the way that our bodies release tension naturally. It doesn't do it through stretching, as much as all of us yogis go, but wait a minute, stretching is everything. It's actually not. When we look at the way that our nervous systems work. So we use pandiculation, which a simple pandiculation is this, like, oh, we stretch and we
just when you wake up first thing in the morning, you naturally want to do this.
We extend the muscle and we tense it, and then it releases. And so it's this idea of creating tension in what's already tense so that it can actually let go. And at the same time, we're synchronizing that movement with breath, which is stimulating our nervous system into the relaxation response, which is further going to let the body release that tension. So I incorporate a lot of Hanna somatics into the work that I do. And I'm also steeped in trauma healing and the way that trauma presents as tension in the body. And we are mammals, so we're all animals. And much like all the other mammals on this planet, our brain has this system of survival to keep us safe. This primitive part of our brain, our core brain, that exists in the brainstem. And this is where our fight, flight, freeze response and the stress response lives. And it's genius. It's this brilliant aspect of being in a human body. And it's kept us all alive and kicking all this time, or else none of us would be here. And we all will respond similarly to a threat. So our bodies actually physically contract in the exact same way when we've undergone a trauma or a stressful situation. And so with this knowledge and understanding that I have of the fascia system and that chain that contracts involuntarily when we go through stress or trauma, we use movements like all these integrative practices that I've learned over the years to specifically target that chain of tension in the body and invite the body to release it, which then it kind of works in an infinity loop. As that starts to let go, it sends a signal to the brain and a signal to the nervous system that we're actually safe, and some other natural ways that the human mammal and all mammals release starts to happen, and then we're free. And living in a body that feels like, my friend Michelle, the one that invented Yoga Line, she says, you get your kid body back. The way that our bodies felt when we were children, when they didn't ache and hurt and we were free to play and run and
play and free of mind stuff too.
Exactly.
That's kind of like what we covered in our first session, was the inner child, befriending the inner child and liberating the adult self. But we forget, don't we? Actually, this has to do with the daily stresses. Let's say you're at work and the work situation, the work politics. I've been in work politics for 20 years. Sorry to say, but there is like constant talk about losing your job and worrying about, really doing your best job at the meeting and the best presentation, all of that. So what if you're not even aware that your stress response system is on now, right? Because it used to be that when a tiger chased us, we felt threatened, which is normal, right? I mean, you run, you go away, protect yourself. But then nowadays, it seems like normal stuff in the office or, hitting the red light even. It's like, oh my God, red light again, all of these small things can generate or trigger the stress response system in our body. So what is it that you're eliminating with the movements and kind of like, how does our body's response system, stress system work?
Yeah, so that's going to be a
Big mouthful.
It's a hefty answer, and we're going to take it one little step at a time. So we need some background information first, and that is to just understand the way that these brilliant, magnificent nervous systems were designed. It's a very nuanced system, but when I explain it, I'm going to explain it in the simplest terms.
Yes.
So we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is an upregulated nervous system. Okay, my nervous system right now, I'm in the sympathetic. I have a little bit of sweat in my armpits. I have my heart rate a little bit higher than it would be if I was just sitting on my couch, because my body is trying to make me rise to the challenge of answering this question, right? And thank goodness for that, because otherwise I wouldn't really be able to function. So being in the sympathetic response isn't bad. It's what we do all day, every day to function. But if I get into a state of stress, that means my nervous system is upregulated for an extended period of time. And this is what we would call chronic stress. We weren't designed on this planet as mammals to be in a state of chronic upregulation. We were designed to upregulate, meet a challenge, and then downregulate and come back to balance, come back into that place where we feel when we're in a downregulated or just a regulated state. Downregulation would be like, I'm winding down and falling asleep, and that's downregulation. If I'm in just a regulated state, back to that balanced state, I have emotions like joy, naturally. I have the desire to connect with other human beings. Like, you know, when you're really stressed out and somebody's like, hi, how are you? And it's like annoying. You're like, oh, right? If I'm regulated, I'm like, oh, hi, yeah, I'm great. How are you? Like,
Yeah.
if you've gone on a Hawaiian vacation to like sleepy island where like the speed limit's 25 miles per hour and everybody's like, yeah, and they stop and they talk. And that first day of vacation, you're like, oh, drive your car. But then by the vacation, you're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, you become like them.
Like that kind, beautiful, sweet self that you remember back when you weren't a completely stressed out person. So we live our lifestyles now. Where oftentimes we don't get a break from that. So let's say we use your example. I'm at work and my job is feeling threatened. That's the saber-toothed tiger for the modern mammal of a human, right? Because that's my security. That's where my money's coming from. That is my sense of security. So my body is going to respond to perhaps my job being threatened in the same way it would respond somewhat to being chased by a bear. Maybe if I was being chased, it'd be a little more upregulated, but you kind of get the point, right?
Yes. Yes.
And we also do things like we drive in vehicles at 80 miles per hour on our California freeways while we're getting text messages and looking down at our phone. And then we scroll and scroll and scroll endlessly. And like we live in such a way that these brains and bodies weren't necessarily designed to live. So most of us are staying in this chronic upregulated state. And certain things happen to us when we're in that regulated state. Our heart rate increases and our breathing becomes short and shallow and rapid. We start to hold tension through what's called the deep front line of connective tissue, which leads to a pulling forward of the body subtly and internally, which then leads to neck pain and shoulder pain and back pain and hip pain. And a lot of the pain syndromes that we see is due to a upregulated nervous system, consistently upregulated, and that chronic tension through the deep front line never resolving. And then we drink caffeine, right? Then we put in our body to try to meet the challenges, right? Yes. So that's an upregulated nervous system. I think all of us can relate to that. How do we know that we're living in an upregulated state? Our body will probably start to hurt. We might start to manifest a lot of other diseases excuse me, like heart conditions, like digestive disorders, IBS, anxiety attacks, depression. Like there's a lot of things that can really be related to having a consistently upregulated nervous system.
Okay. Yeah.
And what we need to find, which is why yoga is such a powerful tool, are ways to downregulate our nervous system and return to balance. So the parasympathetic response is what most of us are seeking, coming into that state of downregulation where I am again feeling peaceful. I have full and complete breaths. My body feels relaxed. My digestion is working well. My endocrine system is balanced. There's a whole cascade of wonderful, balanced, healthy, normal ways of being are really due to just having a regulated nervous system, which is
the state that most of us want to be in, right?
Yeah. And that's why you hear of like I remember this one story that got told to me. I never researched to find out if it was true, but it was a person being told that they had like stage 4 cancer and that they had, a month to live or something insane like that. And so they decided, you know what? I've always wanted to go to a little island in Greece. I'm going to go there. And they went and they started living their life there, and their cancer disappeared because their nervous system downregulated enough that their immune system started to work again, and they healed. So these bodies are designed perfectly to be in perfect balance and in perfect health. It's just we need to learn to regulate our nervous system enough and consistently enough so that we can be in a state of full, glorious health, which is what yoga therapy does. And then there's a lot of other ways to do that. So we can talk about that too. Did I answer the question specifically?
Full, glorious health. How much is that?
It's actually pretty free. All you have to do is learn how to breathe.
And actually putting in the work, right? I teach, I'm happy to say that I teach yoga now about 6 days a week, and different times, like 8 to 9 before work and then after work. And then people who show up before work, I'm like, I know you wanted to stay in the blanket, in the bed, but you showed up. You showed up and you're doing the work. So I think there's something to say about that, right? So Alison, I've heard about shaking therapy. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Yeah.
Absolutely, I can. So there are, that could be a really long answer too. I'm going to try to simplify it. So if we go back to the thought that we are mammals, and I want you to picture a gazelle being chased by a lion. Okay. And that gazelle is in the flight response. It is running as fast as it possibly can.
Yes.
Let's say it gets kind of cornered. It might bonk the lion with its horns. That's the fight response. So we have fight and flight. We have these two responses to escape a threat. We have the same thing. Then, if you've ever watched those videos where the lion grabs the gazelle by the neck and the gazelle just goes loop and just drops, I can remember being like, is it just dead? Like, what happened? It's not dead. It's going into the freeze response. The freeze response is our body's last ditch effort for survival. So we sometimes just call it playing dead, right? Or playing possum.
I've seen animals do that, yes.
Yeah. So fight, flight is like pushing the gas pedal, right? We accelerate, the nervous system upregulates. The freeze response is shut down. So we go kapoom and crash. And so many of us live in the freeze response too, just FYI. Those of us that have gone through trauma, There's a whole cascade of symptoms like chronic fatigue and depression that are a part of chronically being kind of stuck in the freeze response. The solution to the freeze response is the same as coming out of fight flight. So that's the good news. But what often happens once that gazelle that we're talking about, let's say it goes into the freeze response, and that is an effective strategy because sometimes the lion, like, I don't know if any of you have a house cat, they like to play with their food, right? They like to bat that little mouse around and catch it again and bat it around and catch it again until that mouse dies of the freeze response, of fright, essentially. But if that mouse or that gazelle plays dead, sometimes the lion's like, oh, it's not fighting me anymore, and it looks away or lets go of it for a second, and then it takes off. So it's this really successful strategy for survival. So let's say that gazelle gets away. You can YouTube search this to see an actual video of this, but all mammals, once we've escaped a threat where we were activated into the freeze response, we will go and find a quiet place. And usually what happens is the tremoring response begins. So that's the shaking that you were asking about. Scientifically, we sometimes call that a neurogenic tremor. And it's this way that the body resets the tension that has accumulated from the traumatic event. So the body trembles and shakes. And usually what happens, that goes on for, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Then the animal falls asleep, it wakes up, it pandiculates, it shakes it out, and off it goes off into the world. And it's fine. It's fine.
Naturally, yeah.
Its body, brain has processed the traumatic event, and it's back to chilling on the savannah, drinking water from the watering hole. You don't really see stressed out animals like, is there a lion? Is there a lion? They're just like.
Or if one time it happens to you, you keep thinking it's going to happen to you again. Like one of the questions that somebody typed in is how to manage the stress coming from the fear of happenings of future, something bad happening in the future. So, that's what we humans do, right?
And we'll do that in just a second too, of how we can actually process that as well, so that we're not in that constant anxiety.
Yeah.
So the tremoring response exists in human beings as well. But most of us have been conditioned out of allowing it to happen because it looks weird, quite frankly. And if you think about a toddler throwing a temper tantrum on the floor and they're screaming and they're doing all their things, yes, oftentimes that is about releasing. And sometimes if they get upset enough, you'll see a very upset child crying and shaking and their little jaw will be going, right? You've maybe seen that in a really upset toddler before. And oftentimes what happens to us is when we are that age, we get told to stop it. Mm-hmm. And, abandoned during that process, or somehow receive the message that we will not be loved if we allow that natural process of the body to continue. Mm-hmm. As adults, if we are in a situation where something threatening happened and we're trembling, oftentimes we have a response to that that's like, I have to get control of myself. I have to shut this down. And we'll actually stop the body from doing that process. So there are therapies which I have incorporated into some of the trauma release work that I do, where we actually elicit the body's natural tremoring response. And it's gentle. And what ends up happening is the body starts to do that shaking or that tremoring, and we hold space for that to happen for a period of time. And then what ends up happening is my mind, the parts of my mind that process traumatic events, as well as my body, has processed that, and it's not in my body anymore. It's gone. It's healed, just like the gazelle that stands up and is like, okay, I'm good. So to that, and just so that you have this information, like what are those modalities called? There's one called trauma release exercises, or tension and trauma release exercises. And that is the work of David Berceli. And David Berceli has taken these techniques all over the world. He's helped people in Israel and Palestine. He's helped numerous people coming back from war-torn countries, working with groups of people to elicit this tremoring response so that people can move forward and heal. There is a form of yoga that my best friend in the whole wide world, her name is Jenica Mills. She and another friend of hers that were students of David Berceli have created what is called neurogenic yoga.
Neurogenic yoga, okay.
And Jenica Mills is the person that is leading the trainings internationally. And I know she has a training coming up soon. So this is a combination of David Berceli's tension and trauma release exercises put together with yoga. And at the end of the session, your body goes through the tremoring response, which feels really peaceful and really good. And you feel all better. So
wow, all of that, all of these, it seems like new things, but it's what, like you said, what's in the nature, right? What animals in the natures naturally do that we have forgotten.
And indigenous humans do this. I mean,
indigenous, yes, absolutely.
Humans dance, they go into trance. When they go into trance and they're in groups and they're singing together, there's a tremendous amount of shaking that happens in the body. You see it in like evangelical churches where people, oh my gosh, I forgot what the word is, but like they get hit with the spirit and they're on the ground and their bodies are shaking.
I've seen that too. Yeah. That's interesting.
Back in ancient India, it was called spanda karika. It was the spontaneous shaking that happened. So we can put all kinds of mysticism around it, but essentially it's our bodies doing what our bodies were designed to do. Balance.
Yes. Okay.
Fascinating.
So Ruki Baita, if I'm saying this correctly, I'm sorry. He's asking, what could some common easy ways to deliberately come to the down or relaxation response system?
Yeah.
So which is something we wanted to go into anyway, right? Some experiential breathing exercises that I wanted you to guide us through.
So I'll answer that, and I'll also answer the first question about how do we not get into anxiously projecting constantly or worrying that it's going to happen again. If I've experienced a significant trauma, like some kind of natural disaster or event, that I am in a state where I am constantly replaying that event and thinking about it, I have PTSD in that moment. And what I need to come back into balance is some sort of trauma-based therapy to help my body and mind process that. That can take place through somatic experiencing, which is one of the modalities that I'm learning now. It can take place through neurogenic yoga or tension and trauma release exercises. It can also take place with a therapist who uses EMDR, which is a way of doing eye movements that allows the brain to actually process the traumatic event. So if you're a person that has gone through significant trauma, I highly recommend doing some type of trauma healing. Traditional talk therapy is great for understanding perhaps the roots of why we became how we became, but it doesn't necessarily heal the imprint of the traumatic event on the brain and body. So we have a theory of a top-down approach to trauma, which is starting with the brain and moving down, or we have an approach that goes bottom up, which is starting with the body, which then helps the brain. So know that those therapies that I listed are bottom-up techniques. In terms of how do I just on a daily basis, and what simple things can I do on a daily basis to have a regulated nervous system? There's oh so many wonderful simple things. So I'm not sure how many of us here are yoga practitioners, but if we were talking to just like the general public, I would say that ways to regulate your nervous system: go take a yoga class, learn how to meditate, sing on a daily basis. You can even just put a song on in your car and sing. I would say go out into nature and move your body, exercise, take a dip in the ocean, dance, move, get into your body in whatever way feels joyful. Sit with good friends and give each other hugs and talk. Our nervous systems co-regulate with other mammals, which is why equine therapy or therapy dogs are so helpful to humans. You can co-regulate your nervous system cuddling with your cat or your dog. So just finding, like, those are just some simple everyday ways without anything fancy that you can do. If we're going to start to think about the tools that yoga provides for us, we can work with the breath. The breath is our main key to accessing our nervous system. So if I think about the way that a relaxed mammal breathes is a nice deep inhaling breath and a long, slow exhaling breath. So an animal that's at ease has a slow, steady breathing process. An animal that's not at ease, we have short, shallow breaths. So one of the things that really affects the way that I'm breathing is my posture. Right now, I'm sitting upright, right on top of my sitting bones, so I have a long neutral spine, which makes it really easy for me to take a deep inhaling breath and a long, slow exhaling breath. If I was sitting in a position where I'm curled up like this and I'm staring down at my phone, or I'm staring down at my computer or my keyboard, my body is not in a position that it's able to even breathe well. So let's say I'm driving my car in this position, and then I'm going to work and I'm in this position. And then I'm coming home and I'm sitting on the couch and I'm slouched on the couch in this position. I'm spending the entirety of my life in a position that doesn't allow me to take a full, complete breath. If that's the case, that's going to lead to my nervous system thinking, if my nervous system thinks, my nervous system experiencing that something threatening is always happening to me because I'm not breathing properly. So the breath process and our posture are keys to coming into a very regulated state. So if you're wondering in your day, am I breathing? Get into a position where you're sitting upright. Take a slow inhale through the nose and blow a long, slow exhalation out of your lips, like you were blowing out of a straw. And you can take just 3 to 5 breaths like that and notice a difference. So what ends up happening every time we inhale is our system is subtly upregulated. So the inhaling breath is associated with the sympathetic nervous system. The exhaling breath is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. So if I'm in an upregulated state, I'm taking short, shallow breaths that are up here in my upper chest, and I'm never fully exhaling. So if I want to stimulate the parasympathetic, I need to find a breath that elongates the exhalation or accentuates the exhalation. So let's try it right now. So find a comfortable seat where you're sitting up tall, or stand up, or lie down on your back with your knees bent. Find whichever one of those 3 positions works best for you. And you can keep your eyes opened or closed, whichever feels most comfortable to you. And just take a long, slow inhaling breath in through your nose. And make a little O with your lips and blow your exhaling breath out through your lips like you were blowing out of a straw. Without strain. And again, inhale through the nose, take in a full breath. And again, blow the exhalation slowly through the lips. Take a few more rounds at your pace. And just try to let the exhaling breath be just a little bit longer, a little bit slower than the inhaling breath. Notice as you blow that exhalation out if there's any tension that wants to release from the body. Maybe the shoulders want to melt down the back. Maybe your brow, your jaw, your throat wants to soften. Maybe you notice the belly soften and release. And then get a sense of your sitting bones or whatever is in contact with the surface that's beneath you. And just notice how that feels. Notice the sounds that surround you. And if eyes are closed, begin to open them and just lift the eyes and allow your eyes to scan your environment. And just notice what you see around you in this moment. And then return your eyes to the screen. Do you feel different in this moment than you did before we started?
Oh my gosh, it feels like a heavy coat was lifted off my shoulders.
So that was about, I don't know, 2 minutes of orienting and breathing. So what we did is we came into the present moment. We started with the breath. We asked the nervous system to begin to get into the parasympathetic to downregulate a bit. And we just stayed with that feeling of breathing. Then I invited you to notice what was going on in your body, that connection of the sitting bones or whatever was with the back of the body. That brought you into the body and into the present moment. Then we started to orient. We used the eyes to come into the here and now. And those simple practices, breath, embodiment, noticing sensations in the body. We also noticed the sounds that were around us. Coming into the here and now through our sensory experience is a way to begin to allow the nervous system to downregulate. Another incredible tool we have, which is why I mentioned singing earlier, is singing, humming, or chanting. In the yoga traditions, we often have chanting mantra as a powerful tool. And there's a lot of mystical language around, like Sanskrit being a magic language, or Gurumukhi, which is in the Kundalini yoga tradition being magic. The magic that's happening is that we're stimulating the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve. It comes out of our brain. It runs down through the neck, through the throat. It comes down and it innervates all of the viscera. It's our main parasympathetic nerve. So it's the main nerve that talks to your digestive system and your heart and your breathing process. And when we stimulate the vagus nerve, we invite relaxation into the body and into all of our other systems. One of the most powerful ways we have to stimulate the vagus nerve is through vocalization. So if you notice yourself, feeling nervous or upregulated, you could just hum a tone. Or in the yoga tradition, we like to chant the sound of Om. And in our mystical and philosophical tradition, Om is supposedly the sound that birthed the universe into existence. It's the vibration, the vibrational essence of divine consciousness that is running through all of matter here on planet Earth. And so we have this idea that when we chant this sound, we're tuning our own vibration to the all of all, to all that is, the part of us that is in that flow of the river of all of life. Mm-hmm. What's happening scientifically is we're taking a long, slow, exhaling breath, and we're vibrating our vagus nerve with our vocal cords, which elicits the parasympathetic relaxation response in the human organism.
So do you mean by humming, do you mean a slow, quiet humming, or do you mean kind of like a loud humming?
Any old kind of humming is going to do the trick. So you get to do any humming that you want to do.
Okay.
So we try to chant Om together and see how we feel?
Definitely.
Let's do 3. And most of you are by yourself at home, so if you're afraid of singing, don't worry, you're muted. No one can hear you anyway. So we need to, again, find a neutral spine so that we can come into the breath. So again, sit, stand, lie down, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And let's find that breath that we began with. It's called crow's breath. In through your nose. And blow your exhalation slowly out through your lips or your little crow's beak. And just sense how your body feels in this moment as you work with the breath. Notice how it feels to inhale, the expansion, the tension at the top like inflating a balloon. And how it feels to exhale, the natural release, the letting go. And we'll break the sound Om into 3 syllables. First, Ah, then O, and last, Ng, like an NG sound that goes up through your nasal passages. So the Om will sound like, I'm doing this quickly, Aum. We'll do that together 3 times. So let's take a cleansing breath together, in through the nose, out through an open jaw. Notice your breath. Notice your body. Observe points of contact with the earth. Notice the sounds that surround you. And begin to slowly open the eyes and take a look around. Notice where your eyes are drawn. And allow your eyes to linger on whatever they're drawn to just be there for a moment and savor what you see. And slowly make your way back to the screen.
What a perfect ending to our to our 1 hour together. I know you have a hard stop, Alison. I want to let everybody know that we have a good 5 more minutes left. If there is something you want to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Before that, though, I want to let you know that next Sunday, I'm offering a 2 hour gentle yoga practice. So I'm also a yoga teacher. Alison is more experienced than I am, but I definitely would love to have you in my workshop. We do practice the pranayama and some of the actual asanas, the actual poses, but then also focus a lot on paying attention. I'm sorry, that's my alarm going off. I'm going to mute myself. Please unmute yourselves if you have questions.
So I just want to encourage everyone to join Faranak for her workshop. It's going to be really down regulating to your nervous systems. And if you'd like to find me in the world, I do private yoga therapy sessions one-on-one if you're in the San Diego area. If you're not in the San Diego area, I do them via Zoom, so we can do sessions remotely. I also am leading teacher training. So I have a 200-hour teacher training through Soma Yoga Institute. So if you Google Soma Yoga Institute, you'll find me. That's December in Costa Rica. And then next year in 2022, we're leading an advanced training in Greece. And there's also a 200-hour that's going on simultaneously. So you can find me at my name, alisonscola.com.
All right.
4 minutes before I have to go. So I'm happy to take questions. You're welcome to unmute yourself if you have a question, or Faranak, if there's one that you'd like to read.
Yeah. So there's questions about can meditation be used to treat anxiety, or is breathing the only way? So questions around anxiety and meditation.
And meditation is a powerful healing tool that can reduce anxiety tremendously. For me, just doing mindfulness meditation when I was in kind of the height of my anxiousness, it was impossible for me to do because I couldn't sit without my mind destroying me. So I had to use other tools like chanting or reciting mantra silently or using mala beads, something sensory to allow my brain to focus into the present moment. So those are some more advanced meditation techniques that absolutely reduce anxiety. In terms of my view as a trauma healing specialist, sometimes if you're a person that's experienced trauma, meditation can exacerbate the anxiety because of the traumatic event. So again, coming into some sort of trauma healing modality is really, really helpful. And meditation will be kind of like the second step in that process because it's such a powerful healing tool.
Okay. And a question about retention. I know this is kind of really pushing it, but retaining breath, does it increase anxiety or not?
So it depends on the individual. So in general, if you're doing a breath retention on the inhale is part of the sympathetic upregulation, and holding that breath can stimulate an upregulated nervous system. But releasing the breath brings us back into a down-regulated state. So I personally have had a lot of success down-regulating my nervous system using breath retention. However, it can be contraindicated for people with certain health conditions, like heart conditions specifically. You don't want to be holding your breath. And it can also, if you're not being guided during that process, it can unleash a lot. So like a lot of emotional release that might feel overwhelming can come doing some of those advanced and more intense pranayama techniques. So just as a disclaimer, I would suggest if you're a person that is dealing with trauma or intense anxiety, get a guide to walk you through some of that pranayama. But the answer to the question is yes.
Yes, yes. I actually, that's a good question, because I often wonder, even when I'm instructing people for retention, I feel like they need to be a little bit more advanced to do the retention. Most people are, familiar with longer exhalation, shorter inhalations, and so on. But then the retention could possibly increase anxiety, depending on the person's state of mind too. But I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate you doing this for me and everybody else. I know I learned a lot. So let's stay in touch. And everyone else, again, I do have a follow-up workshop next week, next Sunday, that we will be covering most of the concepts that Alison covered here, as far as the breathing goes, down regulating the nervous system. And it's a gentle yoga, so it's for all levels. So please join me. I'll
So much for having me. It was such a treat and an honor and a delight. And I'm so excited for you and the way that you're bringing your work to the world. You're marvelous. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. This